All right, thanks for hanging in with us, guys. My name's TJ. I'm going to be your MC for today. We've got Jeffrey Segal of eMerit. He's here with us today, and really what we're talking about today is the difference between bankruptcy and prosperity around online reputation. Jeff he's a founder of eMerit, and he really helps the best doctors get found online. He's been a medical practitioner for many years and understands really the friction between how to connect the best doctors to the right patients. So that's a little bit about Jeff, and what we'll do is we've got some Q&A that we'll do towards the end of the webinar. What we'll do is Jeff's going to give us a breakdown between how online reputation really affects patient intake and how doctors are being found. But what we want to do is give you guys the opportunity to ask questions, opportunity to engage at the end. So if you could just go ahead and send us your questions, we'll write those down, and then we'll spend hang on with us towards the end of the webinar, and we'll spend some time doing some back and forth and answering those. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Dr. Jeffrey Segal.
Greetings. Hey, thanks everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to join. The topic today is your online reputation, the difference between bankruptcy and prosperity. I run an organization called eMerit. eMerit helps patients find the best doctors on the internet, helps the best doctors be found. I also run a sister organization called Medical Justice, and we've been working with healthcare providers for well over a decade. And some of the things we're going to talk about is how the online world has changed. Because if you had asked me this question a decade ago, does the online world make any difference whatsoever, my answer would have been absolutely not. Patients find you the good old-fashioned way, either from friends and family or from referring doctors. The online world, who would find a doctor on the internet? Well, the world has changed, and we're here to talk about how the world has changed, but most importantly, how to tap into that so that you've got a thriving practice and you're prosperous. So let's jump in. If you do have questions, pop them into the question box there. We will do our Boy Scout best to get these questions answered during the discussion at the end of the presentation. If I fail, if I do not get to your question, do not despair. You can email me at jsegal@emerit.biz, and I will have that at the end that you will be able to see, jsegal@emerit, emerit.biz. So let's dive in. We've got a lot to talk about. People get angry, and the online world is a typical place where people vent their spleen, where they describe how unhappy they are with your care, how revolting you are as an individual, what a disgusting professional you are. And we've seen everything under the sun. Surgeons described as butchers, crooks, fraud, scam artists, and my favorite, I'd give 0 stars if I could, because most rating sites only allow 1 to 5 stars. Yes, 0 is not an option, but we do get the point that if you have a 1, 1 is about the same as a 0. What are some of the challenges with rating sites? Rating sites really didn't exist a decade ago, and now there are about 70 of them, most of which allow you to rate a doctor anonymously. So the first and most obvious is that posts are anonymous. You don't know if the person writing about you is a patient or someone posing as a patient. Who, you might ask, would ever pose as a patient? Well, anyone with an axe to grind. That would include a disgruntled employee, an ex-spouse, a competitor. We've seen all of the above. And so anonymity gives people the courage to be able to say things they would otherwise never say to your face, and oftentimes it's not positive. Another problem with rating sites is that doctors cannot fully respond. We can't fully respond because of HIPAA and state privacy laws. So if the Ritz-Carlton, for example, gets a rotten review, they can go on there and, chat conveniently about all the problems that they had, as well as the problems they had with you as the client. But doctors' hands are tied. We can't really go into detail, we can't even acknowledge that a particular patient is even your patient. So our hands are tied. Doesn't mean you can't respond, it just means you cannot fully respond. And we'll talk about things that you can do as you respond and get your story out to the world. And next, good medicine is not always popular. Doing the right thing will not always give you kudos on the internet. So what's an example of that? Well, if a patient asks for their third refill of Percocet and you say 2 is enough, you may not get high fives on the internet. In addition, many moms come in asking for antibiotics for a junior when junior has an obvious viral infection. What to do? Well, the right thing to do is to take a couple of minutes and explain why antibiotics are not a great idea. On the other hand, you do have to take the time to do it. But if you don't give the antibiotics and you don't explain, you may end up getting beaten up on the internet. So what does the internet look like? Well, everyone's familiar with Google and page 1, and Google previously had 7 slots on its valuable front page real estate, which included a map as well as Google reviews. Very valuable piece of real estate. Here's an example of what people saw when we did a search for ophthalmologists in Durham, North Carolina. We had some clients that were in that region, and we were trying to better understand what the landscape looked like. And at the time, Google would position 7 businesses, 7 practitioners in that coveted, we called it a 7-pack. Well, the world has changed. Google now only has 3 positions. They call it a 3-pack, or more euphemistically, a snack pack. But by and large, the real estate has become more valuable as the resources have become a bit more scarce. But take a look at what we see right here with the examples. We see that there are 7 total positions, and a couple of them have Google reviews. Almost, let's see, 5 of them have no reviews whatsoever. So the landscape is wide open for any of these practitioners to gather Google reviews and differentiate, separate from the pack. So let's take a look at a different search term. In this particular case, it's LASIK in Durham, North Carolina. Durham is the same neighborhood. LASIK is the more desirable procedure the ophthalmologists want to perform. The reason being it's a cash pay and not reimbursed but by an insurance company. And the thing that grabs your eye here immediately is that on the bottom right hand of your screen, you will see that Travers LASIK Vision Care has 4.9 star reviews with a total of 61 Google reviews. And there's only one other entity on there, LASIK Eye Center of Carolina, which has any stars whatsoever, any reviews. So one might argue, well, what difference can stars make? Well, it does make a difference because it definitely catches your eye. As you're looking, or as a patient is looking, as a patient is searching, the thing that they see is the symbols that Google has determined grabs people's attention. In this particular case, a star rating of 4.9 with large numbers of stars, 61 Google reviews and 9 Google reviews, will get attention, and people do click on this. So let's dive a little bit deeper. Let's type in, and I did this already, ophthalmologist, Raleigh, North Carolina. At this point, only 3 positions are returned. This is more in keeping with Google's 3-pack or Google's snack pack. And here, different region. It's a little bit distant to Durham, North Carolina, but not too far. Raleigh is the large major metro area adjacent to Durham, North Carolina. And again, you'll see that what grabs your eye are the stars and the number of reviews. So here, Lowry Porter Ophthalmology has a qualitative rating of 5.0 with 13 Google reviews, and Raleigh Ophthalmology has qualitative rating of 4.0 stars with 8 Google reviews, and Park Ophthalmology is waiting to get into the game. Now, there are plenty of other ophthalmologists in the neighborhood It's just that Google, in its infinite wisdom, has not seen fit to place them on the front page. So more on this in just a few minutes. The key question is going to be, well, how pray tell do you get the name of your organization on, position 1, 2, or 3 of this Google snack pack, and how do you get Google reviews, large numbers of high-quality reviews? More on that in a few minutes. So before we move on, let's talk about online reputation. Does it even matter? I mean, yes, people search on the internet, but does that translate into anything different, particularly as it relates to healthcare? And I do think that reviews impact revenue. They certainly impact revenue broadly, and there's been a fair amount of this written in the business literature. In particular, the Harvard Business Review did a review article or a research article looking at restaurants in the Seattle region, and when they finally collated the data, they understood or concluded that for every 1-star increase in a Yelp rating, revenue for those restaurants went up about 10%. Conversely, for every decrease of a 1-star rating in Yelp, revenue went down about 10%. So if you're a restaurant in Seattle, I think we can conclude that what you look like on Yelp in terms of star rating seems to make a difference in terms of either more or less revenue. But this does bleed over into healthcare, and this has been studied repeatedly. I just pull out 2 recent articles, one of which, or actually both of which, are from JAMA. In those particular articles, it says that patients are looking at online reviews, and to the extent patients see a large number of negative reviews, 40% said they will not see the doctor. So let me repeat that. If you have a fair number of negative reviews without anything to balance that, 40% said they wouldn't even see you. Now, I'm not talking about just a single negative review. I'm talking about a collection of negative reviews that essentially are unanswered. And pretty similar to that statistic, 60% of patients who were surveyed in a review article in JAMA said that online reviews are important. Now, what's interesting about that article is now dated. It's old, it's stale. Now, even more, a larger percentage of patients believe that online reviews are important. Those who ignore online reviews do so at their peril. They can be a problem, but they can also be an amazing benefit, an amazing boon to a practice. So let's see how people are finding doctors today. 10 years ago, I think the statistics were pretty straightforward. Patients found you either from friend or family or a referring doctor. On occasion, they would go straight to an insurance roster and pick you out randomly from there, and maybe even someone found you in the Yellow Pages. Anyone remember what the Yellow Pages are? I actually got a print version delivered to my doorstep last year. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to be using it for, but I think probably just to keep the door open. But we have new statistics, and this keeps changing year after year. 25% of patients are now finding you initially on the internet. So let me repeat that. About 25% of patients are finding you initially on the internet. And even if they find you the traditional way, meaning friends or family or referring doctor, they're still going to the internet to validate that decision. So the internet is playing a really dominant role in terms of defining how patients find you initially, and number 2, to the extent that they found you some other way, whether to actually make that appointment or keep that appointment. One additional comment that I'll make is that 2011, I was a fairly vocal skeptic of the value of online reviews. In fact, my working hypothesis was that people can react and respond on the internet, but they're not really talking about true quality. What they're commenting on are the things that are the softer aspects of a practice. Customer service, for example, bedside manner, communication, parking, money, things that arguably patients are quite adept at commenting on. but my working hypothesis was that patients knew very little about patient safety and they knew very little about clinical outcomes. So I wanted to demonstrate just how valueless online reviews were. I got a list of the best and worst surgeons from a large insurance company. And when I say best and worst, we were using proxies for the things that matter the most, namely patient safety and clinical outcomes. But I was blinded as to which surgeons were in which bucket. I had some interns go to the internet and see what patients were saying about these particular doctors, and when we unblinded the study, it turned out that my working hypothesis was completely wrong. Best surgeons actually had the best online reputations. The worst surgeons, when I say worst, I'm talking about safety and outcomes, as I alluded to earlier, they had the worst online reputations. Now, this wasn't a perfect correlation, but it was a strong correlation. And at that point in time, I became a believer. I believed that the internet is a useful patients in the direction of the things that matter, namely safety and clinical outcomes, and I thought, take advantage of it. If that's the case, we really should figure out a good mechanism so that the patients can get their message up to the internet and doctors can actually encourage their patients to tell their story online. So how do patients technically look for and find doctors? How do they find quality? It's a very busy slide, but suffice it to say that before patients know who they're looking for, they know what they're looking for. Let me repeat that. Before patients know who they're looking for, they know what they're looking for. So in this particular case, pretend that I'm pregnant in Houston, Texas. I just moved there and I'm looking for an OB-GYN because I'm going to deliver a baby, and OB-GYN is precisely what I need. So the first thing I'll do, if I don't know, a whole lot of people, and perhaps I don't even have a primary care doctor in Houston, is to type in OB-GYN Houston, Texas, and then Google delivers a collection of results, and perhaps it has names. It should certainly have practice names and individual names. Now Google has its 3-pack, and then based on that, if there are reviews on there, I'll start to narrow my search. Ideally, with a particular doctor, I may even add the word reviews, but right now you don't even need to add reviews. Google just assumes you are looking for reviews. My search starts broadly. It then, like a funnel, starts to constrict until I pick up the phone and make an appointment. So I think it behooves doctors to ask their patients or encourage their patients to give feedback online. And there are 4 ways to do this. One is just ask your patient. Just say, would you be kind enough when you go home to write a review about me on the internet? And while that's the easiest thing to do, it's the least effective because patients are busy. They're like you and me. They're distracted. If they're happy, once they've gone home, they've moved on. They're doing something else. If they're unhappy, they may find the time to do it. So just asking your patient will occasionally get you a result, but it would be extremely uncommon and unusual. The next thing you can do to make it a little bit easier for your patient to do a review is to give them a printed card with the actual review site, and ideally with the domain name or the URL of your name on that particular site. So you've made it a little bit easier for the patient, and if they're loyal and like you a lot, they'll go through the effort and actually make this happen. But again, people are busy. It still requires effort, maybe not a lot of effort, but it certainly takes some effort to make that happen. So the yield is a little bit more than just asking the patient, but not a lot more. Next, again, making it a little bit easier, the third thing that you could do would be to email, if you have permission to email your patient, a link directly to the website that will allow the patient to just input the review. So this is actually helpful, but if the website requires an account and you have to give an email address and personal information, you'll see that patients just blow it off. Anything that requires extreme effort at home, or even modest effort at home, is going to be a friction cost, making it more challenging to gather a review. And the easiest way and the most efficient way to gather reviews would be using a point-of-service system in your practice, either in the exam room, in the waiting room, at checkout, which captures the patient while they're there. You're asking the patient while they're there to give feedback. 99% of patients in our experience say yes, they'll be happy to do it. And we have a system, we propagate a system called eMerit, which makes this happen. We've answered all of the technical issues associated with this, and I know I'm going to get the question, what about, coming from your office with a single IP address? Every review that goes up using the eMerit system goes up with a unique and local IP address, which is not your office. So I'm anticipating the question that I know at least one of you were going to ask. But this is the easiest way to get reviews. When the patient is in your practice at the point of service, they're delighted, typically they're delighted to give their honest answers, knowing that it doesn't require a whole lot of effort to get this uploaded to the internet. Once they've answered a few questions, they're done, they're out the door, and they've moved on to the next challenge in their life. So let's go through the gynecologist process we talked about earlier. How does capturing point-of-service reviews in your office, what does it look like in the real world? What does it look like on the internet? So in this particular case, if you were to type in gynecologist use in Texas, Google will deliver its 3-pack under a map, and the thing that grabs your eye, or it should grab your eye, would be Complete Women's Care Center. It's a Complete Women's Care Center, and this model has 126 reviews that are 4.9. Obviously, they're hitting this out of the park, and it grabs the attention of any prospective patient that has typed in those magic search terms, gynecologist, Houston, Texas. Now, if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll see that one of the doctors there is Dr. Susan Hardwick-Smith, and she also looks good. She is a member, or the owner actually, of Complete Women's Care Center, and she also looks quite good. She's got 41 Google reviews. She's got a large number of reviews on health grades in the hundreds, large number of reviews on yellowpages.com, large number of reviews on You Compare Health, and so on and so forth. So she's been able to create a mutual fund, if you will, of reviews, not just on one particular site, but on many sites. And so it creates a broad picture. It looks organic. It looks natural. It actually is organic and natural. If you only have reviews on one site, so for example, if you contracted with an organization that has its own site, like Demand Force, for example, you can end up getting 300 or 400 reviews on one site, namely Demand Force. But stop making your monthly payments, all those reviews go away, and you have nothing left. You don't have a mutual fund of reviews. What you actually have is all your risk concentrated in one site. It doesn't look as real as a diversified portfolio of reviews. It looks actually like marketing material. All right, we like to simplify what people look like online by putting together what's called a medical identity map, or eMerit map, and it looks at multiple quadrants. We're looking at the number of online reviews and the quality of online reviews, and ideally you'd like to be in the upper right-hand portion of this map. Upper right-hand portion is a large number of high-quality reviews, which we label Center of Excellence. That's where you'd love to be, because that correlates quite well with prosperity. The place where you don't want to be would be in the upper left, which would be a large number of negative reviews, bankruptcy. Now, most people aren't in either bankruptcy or Center of Excellence. Most people are in the bottom half of the graph, which correlates with small numbers of reviews. They may be slightly positive, they may be slightly negative, they may be stale, they may be old, but it really means that the public doesn't have a good and strong picture of who you are and what you do. The thing about bankruptcy and Center of Excellence is that the public has spoken, and there are a large number of reviews, and the public can make its decision. The good news, I think, if you're in service recovery or what we call low consistency or low trust, all places in the bottom half of the graph, is that it doesn't require extraordinary effort to work your way up to the top right. Assuming you're doing a good job or willing to improve, working your way up to center of excellence is a little more than tapping in to the voice of your patient, getting them to tell their story, making it easy for them to tell their story, and the eMerit point of service review capture system allows this to happen. So again, let's move away from theory. Let's talk about how this works in the real world. So going back to Complete Women's Care Center, Houston OB-GYNs, they started this journey with 5 OB-GYNs, and I would argue a pretty competitive environment. I have no idea how many OB-GYNs practice in Houston, Texas, but there are a healthy number. It's the 4th largest city in the country, and Google is only going to give 3 slots to on its page 1 search to those practitioners that they believe are doing the best potential job. So here, movement occurred from the bottom of the graph up to the top right with Center of Excellence, and now virtually all of these doctors appear in the Center of Excellence or the perceived Center of Excellence, a large number of high-quality reviews. They all have a strong presence on page 1 of a Google search, particularly if you type in their name. And interestingly enough, their practice has doubled in size. It's gone from 5 doctors to 11 doctors. At the time I made this slide, they had captured over 6,000 reviews. So pause for a second to think about this, that they had been able to capture over 6,000 reviews when I made this slide. Now, I made this slide many months ago, and that number is much higher. So they've been able to embed it into their workflow, no problems in terms of getting reviews, and they do an excellent job. Do they make everyone happy? They do not make everyone happy, but for the most part, you know, they look like rock stars on the internet. The other thing that's kind of cool about this is that their newest doctors, the ones who just graduated from residency, look almost indistinguishable from the veterans. And the reason is they're digital natives. They jumped into the internet and online reviews and embedded it into their workflow pretty rapidly. It was natural and native to them. And in a matter of months, they were able to control what they look like on the internet and have a booming practice. So this has been very encouraging for us, but it's also been very encouraging for the practice because historically they had allocated up to 3 years before their newest hires would be in the black, where they would be making money on their newest hires. Now, by using the internet to leverage the practice, it only takes 6 months. So within 6 months, these doctors were profitable. Certainly by year 3, they were making a great deal of money for the practice. So we're pretty proud of what they've been able to accomplish. And my guess is they'll continue to grow in size using this very easy platform to accomplish that. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the benefit of deputizing patients to post reviews to help you control the online world. Several years ago, I had a herniated disc. I woke up with rip-roaring pain in my neck, shoulder, and arm, and I knew precisely what was going on because I am a neurosurgeon by training. It was a C5-6 herniated, let me back up, it was a C6-7 herniated disc. And I tried to treat it conservatively, could not get relief, and finally went to a buddy of mine who said, you probably need to take it out. And so I said, let's do it. He took it out. I was immediately better in the recovery room, went home that evening, went back to work part-time the following day, and was back on a bicycle in 2 weeks. So we had 2 surgeons who operated on me, the primary surgeon and the assistant. And what's interesting is that the surgeon on the left of your screen, the example I'm giving and why it's personal to me, he was the primary surgeon, and the assistant surgeon is the one on the right. So these are both talented surgeons. They both work in the same practice. They're both trained in the same institution. I think the world of both these people. They certainly helped me get back to the life that I was hoping to lead in a timely fashion. And I know them as an insider as being talented practitioners. But if you didn't have this insider information, if you just looked them up on the internet, you'd see that the surgeon on the left looks dramatically different than the surgeon on the right. Surgeon on the left is comfortable and confident in terms of getting reviews from patients. Surgeon on the right has allowed nature to take its course. He's being defined by those who have the time to, to search the doctor onto the internet and write commentary, and what you see is what you get right here. And this makes a difference in terms of what the practice looks like. So the surgeon on the left is busy. He sees a lot more volume and probably brings in a lot more revenue than the surgeon on the right. When people are calling the practice for a new appointment, they say, well, we can get you to see Surgeon B, the one on the right. I can get you to see him next week. Then the patient who has no knowledge of the practice will say, look, what about Surgeon A? What about Dr. Stern? I'd like to see him. We'll say, well, he's booked out for 4 weeks. The answer they often hear is, well, then I'll wait. They'll wait. They'll wait to see him. And the question then is, well, why will you wait to see Dr. Stern, the surgeon on the left? And the answer almost uniformly is, I found him on the internet. He looks great on the internet. I read his reviews. He's the doctor I want to see. So the internet does impact new patient volume, new patient revenue, and how busy you are in a practice. But it's even broader than that. What Dr. Stern has realized is more than just a local benefit. He now sees people coming in from geographic distant areas. So in his particular case, looked at some zip codes where patients were coming from. I live, and he lives, in Greensboro, North Carolina. I would not say that Greensboro is the Mayo Clinic or Johns Hopkins of medical care. It's got a very medically sophisticated community, but it doesn't have an iconic brand name. But here on the map, the thing that pops out is that you see patients coming to his practice from Miami, Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, West Virginia, Washington, D.C., the coast of North Carolina, the mountains of North Carolina. Dr. Stern has benefited by seeing patients from multiple locales. So how is it that patients are actually finding him? I mean, I think what's happening is that he has operated on someone locally, like me. And the local people are having conversations with friends and family who live in these distant areas, who live in Miami, Jacksonville, West Virginia, Washington, D.C. And as they talk to each other, the people who live distantly will say, hey, I just found out I've got a herniated disc and I'm thinking about surgery. The next natural discussion is, well, why don't you come down to Greensboro, North Carolina? You can have it done with Dr. Stern, and you can stay with us while you're here. We can catch up, you know, your friends, your family. We'd love to see you. And by the way, you can look him up on the internet to see what people have been saying about him in the past. So this is what's really different. The before picture was there would be no way for people to really get information that easily. They would have their surgery done locally unless they had something unusual and rare, in which case they would seek out care in an iconic institution. But now it is not unusual at all for people to travel from one city to another, from one time zone to another, from one country to another to seek care. In fact, we have some clients, because we measure these statistics. If you're a new patient, where'd you come from? 80 to 85% of their practice says the internet. Then we ask what site, you know, where on the internet did you find these particular people? So these are questions we ask patients in the eMerit survey, the point of service survey. And the thing that's kind of cool about this is that we can see the number coming from the internet go up and up. You're still going to see people the traditional way, friends and family, as well as referring doctors. But the internet rounds it out, and if we're doing our job well, that number should go up each year that you start to control the internet. All right, now that we've talked about reviews in general, you will get an inevitable negative review. You cannot go a lifetime and not piss off someone. You will have a negative review. The question is what to do. Do you just ignore it and let nature take its course, or do you respond? And I'm kind of a fan of responding. I do think that how you manage conflict says a lot about your practice, and that's something you probably do want to tell the world. But before we talk about how you respond, we need to figure out who you're responding to. So in one model, you actually know who the patient is. So you could respond substantively. In the other model, you don't know precisely who the patient is, and we've got to try and figure out either who it is or what the message is. So let's start with you actually know who the patient is. What I would argue is do it old school. Reach out to the patient privately if you can, and typically that means picking up the telephone and calling them. Doesn't mean they'll take your call, but most patients are kind of blown away when you call them and say, look, I got to let you know, I do read reviews on the internet. I have staff who read reviews on the internet, and I can see that you weren't particularly happy about our last interaction. I want to see if there's anything I can do to make it right. The mere fact that you reached out to this particular patient already changes the discussion, changes the dynamic. 95% of patients will react positively to your overture. That doesn't mean 100% will. There are still malicious sociopaths that are out there, and it is unfortunate you can't make everyone happy, but for those who are unhappy, the good news is that you can actually make most of those unhappy patients happier, at least turning a negative to a neutral, if not a positive. So let's look at a particular example. This happened not too long ago. We have a client named Dr. Bazzotti, who's a sports medicine doctor on the West Coast. And he was seeing a teenage patient who came with her mother for a second opinion. The patient was a soccer player and was quite active and wanted to and had a knee problem. Had seen another orthopedic surgeon, another sports medicine doctor, and they recommended surgery. So they were only going to see Dr. Bazzotti for a second opinion, but they pretty much had a surgery date and they were hell-bent on having the procedure done. No conservative therapy for her. It's not clear that Dr. Bazzotti heard that exact message, and he probably was having a busy day. But when the patient came in, his initial instinct was to manage the patient conservatively and said, we'd recommend a brace. Many times this gets better with conservative management on its own, and he's a conservative doctor, although clearly he operates. And he told the family, said, I don't know if your insurance carrier will pay for the brace. If it doesn't, it'll be about $300. Why don't you follow up with me after you've worn this brace for X number of weeks? And out the door he went. Well, the next interaction was on the internet. It turned out the patient did have the surgery and was on the road to recovery, but the patient's mother was miffed because Dr. Bazzotti didn't quite appreciate why the patient was there. The good news was the patient had had surgery and was doing well and hopefully was on the way back to the soccer field. But the other thing that really irritated the mom was that she got stuck with a $300 bill. It turned out that the insurance company did not, they had to write a check to the practice, and that's what they were miffed about. So what Dr. Bazzotti did is that he reached out to the mom, and he did it, I think, in a written form. He wrote her a letter and just said, I dropped the ball and I apologize. I'm so sorry. I didn't quite appreciate precisely why you were there, but I want to do what I can make it right. First and foremost, I'm so glad your daughter's doing well. Second, I know you've got a brace and the insurance company didn't pay for it, and I know you were a good citizen and wrote a check to my practice. I'm sending you back what you paid me, so you don't need to worry about that. You can keep the brace. We're obviously not going to take the brace back. Again, I am so sorry. And finally, because I read about this on the internet, I would appreciate it if either you would remove the review or update it. But please understand this is a request, not a demand. And those are the magic words you really want to use. The patient should always be in the driver's seat. You want to say, this is a request, not a demand. And so what happened? Well, the mom did not take down the review, but she turned a 1-star review into a 5-star review with the secondary comment, Dr. Bazzotti listened, he really rocks. So again, turned a 1-star review into a 5-star review and said, Dr. Bazzotti listened, he really rocks. Now, I'll argue that going from a 1-star review to a 5-star review probably is even better than had the patient not posted the nasty review in the first place. I'm sure Dr. Bazzotti didn't want that 1-star review, but turning a 1-star review into a 5-star review shows that it can be done, and we provide those types of helping. So reaching out, you know the patient is, reach out to them. Picking up the phone or writing a letter is a good way to make that happen. You could private message the patient on the social media platform. I'm not a big fan about doing that because it's not considered a secure environment. Sites like Yelp or other sites, even though they have private messaging functionality, they are not HIPAA business associates with you, which would be somewhat the bare minimum to use that platform to communicate. On the other hand, reaching out to them with a private message saying, I read your review, I appreciate you calling my office so we can talk about it, or you say, I will now call you, that's probably okay. I'm not speaking for the Office of Health and Human Services, and giving HIPAA advice on this, but I think that's one of the challenges, how do you do this stuff with HIPAA? All right, so nice segue into responding to reviews. You don't know who the patient is. Before you did know who the patient is, and you could reach out to the patient and hopefully figure out how to de-escalate conflict. But many reviews are anonymous, and you are clueless. You have no idea who the patient actually is, and you're just scratching your head guessing. But you can still deliver a message. Here you're not delivering a message to the patient himself or herself. You're delivering a message to the public. And the subtext of your message is that you take criticism seriously and you want to improve your practice, that you do listen, and you want to make sure that patients have a voice and you have ears and will listen. So you can take the bait. There are plenty of things to talk about. You can talk about practice philosophy. If there's a general question about money and a misunderstanding of how much you charge for a particular procedure, you can answer it. If they're bitching and moaning about staff and it's the third complaint you've gotten about a particular staff member, you can take the bait and actually respond. Plenty of places to do this without violating HIPAA. So as one example, if someone who looks anonymous posts something about a plastic surgical practice and says, I had a procedure done, hang on for a second, upper left, there you go. I had a procedure done and I don't like the actual outcome of that procedure, and now he wants me to pay $3 grand to fix the mistake that he created. That doesn't seem fair. If it turns out that your practice philosophy is the exact opposite, where you want patients to be happy and you will reasonably do revisions where you waive your professional fee or maybe even pay for the surgery center, if that is what you do, and many plastic surgeons actually do that, then tell the world. You should take the bait. You should promote what your practice philosophy is. Here, not only are you correcting a misperception, but you're also marketing your practice, describing how you're different than everyone else. And that's a real positive. So you've taken the negative from the patient, turned it around, corrected the record, and turned it into a real positive. Payment. If someone says that I went to the doctor and he made me pay up front for a $300 office visit, and it turns out that in reality the first visit in your practice is free, kumbaya together, tell the world that. These are easy things to tell the public. Staff. Occasionally you've got the wrong person in the wrong job. Your front office, the people that answer the phone or the people that greet patients when they come in the door, often they're wonderful people with great human skills, but sometimes they're people who have other skills. They don't have great human skills, but they may have great accounting skills, or they may have great scheduling skills, but they just don't know how to connect comfortably with your patients. In that particular case, if that happens over and over again, I would act on it. I mean, if you're seeing the complaint happen over and over again, it's not just someone having a bad day, it's someone having a lot of bad days, and you either need to move that staff to a less visible position or maybe even terminate that staff member. But if you do that, if you look and you've moved a staff member or even terminated that, you can tell the world that. It basically reinforces the message that you're listening to what patients are saying. More importantly, you are taking action on what patients are saying. All right, how do you respond to reviews? This is a review and a response from a neurosurgeon. I point this out just to show everyone what not to do. And in the top review, the patient says they never got to see the neurosurgeon when expected, normally seen by a PA. Not the end of the world. You know, PAs often are excellent extenders to a practice. And this patient is saying, I would not refer or recommend this doctor to someone who had a traumatic brain injury. He had hydrocephalus with a shunt. So he's unhappy with the doctor, or in this case, the PA, saying poor diagnosing. Input and insight on this neurosurgeon is his own opinion, and everybody has their own opinion, etc. So in my world, I probably would have reached out to the patient if you knew who it was. If you didn't know who the patient was, I probably would have delivered a diplomatic and civil response. But here's what the doctor wrote. He writes, hey, you idiot, what does poor diagnosis and prognosis outcome mean? Get your shunt adjusted to a lower pressure. You have no insight, so don't talk about my insight. Trash-talking loser. Sorry you have a brain injury. That's my opinion. Now, if you're trying to convey that you're a compassionate, empathetic physician, using that type of response probably did not make that happen. So I think there are probably 1,000 ways to do this, but I would resist the impulse to fight this fight out onto the internet. I'm a neurosurgeon. We have egos. Most doctors have egos, and it hurts when you see patients who are irritated. But there are better ways to make this happen. And actually, if you already have scores, if not hundreds of reviews on the internet, you really will not lose any sleep when you get the inevitable negative review. It will happen. It happens to everyone. But you're not, if you've got scores, if not hundreds of reviews on the internet, you're not being defined by this one unhappy patient. So how we respond defines a bit about our character, and I think it defines how the public will think of you and whether they actually want to see you or not. So here's a better response to a review, but I will still define a HIPAA caution here. Be careful. So here, patient gives a 2 out of 5-star review. She's unhappy. She didn't use her name. She says her name here is JMC, and so, you know, it's unclear just by looking at her name who this patient actually is. But she's saying her son did not see the actual doctor, so she can't rate him, but she saw Ephraim Morales, and he'd been treating my son since early September from a rash, etc., etc. And then the response was from the dermatologist that owned the practice, and he's saying, I'm concerned about what you posted. I'd love to speak with you regarding what happened. If a mistake was made, I'd like to do everything to make sure it doesn't happen again. These are actually things that would make good sense. I mean, you know, it's a good way to deliver a message to the public. Here, you're not doing what we did in the previous slide where you're calling the person an idiot. Here, you look empathetic and compassionate, hoping to solve the patient's problem. The problem we have here is that the patient, even though she has mostly used either a pseudonym or initials, has posted her picture. So it turns out to be a HIPAA challenge to if you even acknowledge that a particular person is your patient, that's a release or disclosure of protected health information. You're not allowed to do that unless you have the patient's written authorization or unless there's an exception. And on the online world, it's unfortunately true that you still need to abide by HIPAA. Several doctors have asked us, well, if the patient puts their name on the internet and they're talking about my practice, do I not have the right and the ability to react and respond? Hasn't the patient already given up their HIPAA rights, if you will? And the answer is no. The law is quite clear. We had asked the federal agency that oversees HIPAA to give some guidance. You know, do patients waive their HIPAA rights if they've already done the disclosing themselves, if they've outed themselves? And the answer is quite clear. Patients do not waive their rights. That if you want to release or disclose protected health information, you either need to have the patient's written permission or it needs to be an exception, and responding online typically doesn't fall into either of those two categories. The cautionary tale, just be careful that responding is a good idea if it's done in a HIPAA compliant way. On the other hand, you know, just be careful with HIPAA. HIPAA can really bite you, particularly if a patient is unhappy and angry. It doesn't take much for the patient to go out to file a complaint with Department of Health and Human Services, and now you, instead of one problem, you have two problems. So let's wrap up, and then we've got some time for questions, I hope. All you need to know, you should see what your patients are saying about you onto the internet. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to go clicking onto the 70 review sites out there every day. We make it quite easy. If you're not a member of eMerit, we encourage you to join, but at no cost, we'll do the monitoring for you. Take a look at that link. It's info.emerit.biz/monitoring. We'll get you set up on push monitoring. We'll do the monitoring. Every time we find something out there, we push it into your direction. I know you've got a gazillion things to worry about. This would be one less thing to actually have to worry about. Number two, do not sweat an occasional negative. You will get a negative review. It does happen. The best practitioners get negative reviews. Actually, it's not such a bad thing. If you get an occasional negative, it makes all the positives look authentic and real. If you have nothing but, you know, hundreds of positive reviews and not a single negative, the public will conclude, rightly or wrongly, that what's up there is just marketing material. Number three, and the most important point, is encourage your patients to tell the world their story about your practice. Your website is your story to the world, and your patients' reviews are their story to the world. They both work together, and if you have both of those, you will have a booming practice. So with that, let me pause. We do have time for questions. If we do not answer your questions right now and right here, please feel free to email me. You can email me at jsegal, that's J, S as in Sam, E-G-A-L, at emerit.biz. Oh, this is emerit.biz and not emerit.com. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to pause for just a second and see if we have any questions that have come in.
Great, Jeff. Thanks. That was really informative. Really enjoyed hearing that. I think a lot of times doctors, at least from the questions that we've gotten so far, is they haven't been as proactive around really managing their reputation online. And so maybe they've got a really old, bad review from 5 years ago that was maybe a disgruntled employee or someone. And so, how do you take the the position of, well, we really haven't invested too much into this, versus being proactive and getting ahead of the game to get positive reviews? So if you feel like you're behind the ball a little bit, what should you do?
All right. So this is actually not a particularly challenging. This is not a particularly challenging thing to do. What I hear is the problem to be solved is that you may have a few negative reviews, not a large number, just a few, and maybe they're old. So the good news is that the solution to pollution is dilution. So if you're a surgeon, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The solution to pollution is dilution. If you are able to preemptively and proactively gather a lot of reviews, and I'm pushing the eMerit platform because nothing makes it easier than the eMerit platform. It's the point of service. In the time that you've heard this webinar, you could have already captured reviews from your patients, all of which would have gone up to the internet. Within a year, you'd end up having scores, if not hundreds of reviews onto the internet. So what happens? The old bad reviews are diluted. If they're old, they get perceived as being stale, and they become less significant. If they're new and they're bad reviews, you still get the benefit of all those other positive reviews balancing it out. So we tell people that if you only have a handful of negative reviews, your real problem is a denominator problem. You don't have enough reviews, and if you had a large number of reviews and you're doing a great job, the likely answer is that you'd be able to take complete control of your reputation, and you wouldn't need to lose any sleep whatsoever related to the handful of negatives. So again, eMerit makes this happen.
Jeff, that's great. That's a great answer. One of the more technical questions that came in was somebody saying, "Hey, what if I take all of my reviews in the office under the same device, underneath the same IP address? How does Google look at that?"
All right. So we get this question all the time. We had to solve two problems when we came up with the eMerit system. We needed to make it easy for patients to give their feedback, because we knew and know that once patients go home, they have moved on. The unhappy people find the time to write, but the happy patients have moved on. So point of service in your office makes it work. In the exam room, the waiting room, at checkout. We can also do email links, but by and large it's point of service. So then the next question is, it can't, how do reviews get uploaded so that it does not look like it's coming from a single IP address, in particular your office address? The answer is that the reviews are captured in your practice. They go to our servers, and those servers upload the reviews with a unique and local IP address. So if you're in Houston, it'll upload with a Houston IP address, unconnected to your office, to your practice. Each review goes up, and it looks as if it's coming from the patient's house. So we've been able to solve the technical questions. It's a question we get regularly, and thanks for asking it.
Great. So the next question really revolves around health grades. And the person asks, health grades doesn't actually do patient reviews. They only post this to like a star rating system. So you really can't respond to what's actually happening within a star rating system. So what should we actually be able to do if it's just on a star rating system for specifically health grades?
This is a great question. Health grade. I think more broadly, what I want to say that every day is a new day. That there are 70 rating sites that are out there. Health grades is one of the dominant ones, typically found on page 1 or page 2 of a Google search. And historically, that is correct. While health grades has been in business for over a decade, they typically ask very bland and basic questions. They had a star rating, but they didn't allow patients to write in text commentary. And no less important, there was no place to react and respond. There was no place to adjudicate a negative star rating. But given how dynamic the review world is, that has changed. Health Grades now actually allows patients to submit text commentary. What do I mean by text commentary? Meaning that they can write a paragraph, they can write several paragraphs about the practice. This is really valuable. These are the patient's stories. So instead of just a single question saying, you know, what do you think of your doctor on a scale from 1 to 5, a patient can actually fill in the blanks with a long, detailed narrative saying, I went to see Dr. Segal, I had rip-roaring pain in my left arm, I had a herniated disc at C7, he operated on me, I went home that night, back to work in the next day, part-time, on a bicycle in 2 weeks. Really rich narrative. So Health Grades now enables patient commentary. Health Grades has joined other sites in being able to capture the larger paragraphs that patients are hungry to submit as well as to read. So then the next question is, well, what if I get slammed on Health Grades? Can I react and respond? And the answer is not right now, but Health Grades has reached out for guidance on developing community guidelines as well as how to allow doctors to respond. And one of the groups they reached out to is us here at eMerit, because we've been doing this for a while, and they've asked for our guidance on, you know, how to potentially do this in a way that not only serves the interest of patients but also serves the interest of doctors. So I do think that there's some good news. The sites that are high profile and visible, those are the sites that are trying to figure out, for the most part, how to do it better. There are some sites that'll rate in there, like rip-off report or complaint boards. Those are entities that are just for negativity. But Health Grades has now entered the 21st century. They've certainly entered 2016 by trying to create a dynamic that allows doctors to react and respond. Listen, I am pushing the clock right here. We are actually well beyond. I know we have additional questions. I'm really good at answering questions, and so take a look at the email address on there, jsegal@emerit.biz. That's B-I-Z. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you that, but I'm pretty good about answering that. And I also want to make sure that you get a chance to sign up for free monitoring. This is such a easy piece of cake thing to do, and it puts you in the driver's seat. We call this eMerit Light. The full throttle eMerit does a lot more of this. It adds hand-holding with responding, de-escalating conflict, as well as an iPad in the office for upload of a review. But at the very least, you really should be monitoring what patients are saying. jsegal@emerit.biz. I thank everyone for participating. I hope you have a great weekend. Bye-bye.